First of all, thank you for coming on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. You should be somewhere other than here. It is gorgeous out there. My name is Susan Fineman. I have been volunteering at the Historical Society since about 2006. I'm not the best volunteer in the world because my time is, limited, but they've accepted me in there, and I'm glad to be here. And I've learned so much since I've been a member of this Historical Society. I was a teacher in Lowell, Massachusetts for 31 years and retired in 2002 and was wondering what I'd do with my retirement. I answered an ad in the paper for school marm. Well, I had no idea what that would entail. So I answered the ad, and sure enough, it was for this one-room schoolhouse on the Daniel Webster Highway. Have you been into the schoolhouse? Okay, great. So, and if anyone ever wants to go into the schoolhouse, just call me and I'll get you in. But in that year I was hired, it's sort of volunteering, but we take all fourth graders in the city of Nashua and we give them a 2-hour reliving history session. And they write on slates and they use dip ink pens and we do oral lessons. We read in an 1800s reader. And we tell them a lot about the history of one-room schools in Nashua and how they operated. And the kids go away saying this is the best field trip I've ever been on. So we're very proud of that program, and it's hosted by the Benevolent Association of the Daughters of the King, or the King's Daughters Benevolent Association. So one thing that I was able to do when I came to volunteer at the Historical Society was I was given the opportunity to scan old photos. And of course, the first thing I asked to do was to scan the old schoolhouse photos. And in doing so, it got me really, really interested in the history of Nashua and Nashua schools and how they kind of evolved over the years from the 11 original schoolhouses that were in the city. So that brings me to this little presentation. I have other subjects that I present on, mostly for one-room schools, but this one happened to be of interest to me because in this room, the Historical Society has the town records going back to 1838, and they have them all the way up to today. And in those old records, the town fathers and the superintending committees of schools would write volumes of reports on the condition of their one-room schools. So I went back to the 1840 to 1850s because that's the year of my schoolhouse, or our schoolhouse. It belongs to the city of Nashua, which is an 1841 schoolhouse. So I got into those records and I wanted to see what was going on during those years. What were the reports on those schools in those years? And that's what I'm going to share with you today. Some of the words of the superintending committees, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how progressive the city of Nashua, or the town of Nashua, was even in the 1840s. They got on that education bandwagon and they never looked back. So we'll start with just kind of going back a little bit. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Nashua Historical Society for the use of their collection photos in this presentation. They were very generous to allow me to put this together. So let's take a look at the United States in 1841 when our schoolhouse was built on the Daniel Webster Highway. There were only 26 states in the United States in 1841, and the kids are kind of fascinated by this when we tell them that most of the states were east of the Mississippi River, and we had a long way to go to get to the Pacific Ocean. Well, what else happened in 1841? Not a lot of very interesting things in 1841, but the first and most continuous filibuster in United States history lasted for a month. And they were debating issues like slavery. They were debating issues like the Second Bank of the United States of America, which I still don't have a handle on what the Second Bank of the United States did. Also during 1841 was the trial of the Amistad, and many of you have seen the movie The Amistad, where the mutinous slaves took over the ship and they were charged with mutiny and they were actually eventually exonerated. And then in 1841, William Henry Harrison on the left was elected President of the United States of America. William Henry Harrison was long-winded, and he spoke on his inauguration for 90 minutes. And it happened to be a very cold and rainy day, and William Henry Harrison contracted pneumonia. He lasted about 1 month, and John Tyler had to take over as president because Harrison passed away from pneumonia. So we have in the schoolhouse a lovely little saying that says, "God bless President John Tyler." So they always ask, who is John Tyler in the schoolhouse, and we have to explain. So this is the inauguration day. This is an actual line drawing of the inauguration day, 90 minutes long. They come and they tell John Tyler that he is now the President of the United States only 1 month after Harrison being in office. Now, interestingly enough, the first wagon train to California leaves Missouri in 1841. This was the first time that people were starting to head to California en masse. There had been, adventurers. There had been people seeking gold, but individually. But mountain men would go out there and see what was happening in the West. But this is the first time that people from the East started to head west, and that was 1841. And then there was a fight to reestablish the Second Bank of the United States, which generated some of the worst riots that the United States had ever seen. 1841, that's something you might want to Google if you're interested in the Second Bank of the United States. So, this is where we are in 1841. We're going to look at Nashua, New Hampshire, and how Nashua promoted education in the 1840s to 50s. Now, one of the advantages that the town, I'm going to keep saying city because I live in the city, but town of Nashua at the time had, were 4 things. They had genius, they had capital, meaning money, they had water power, and they had a workforce. And that was, all of those factors are going to be a great advantage to the citizens of Nashua and ultimately to their school system. Now, you all probably know that Nashua was originally part of Dunstable, Massachusetts, and that it was called Dunstable. It was a little confusing, Dunstable, Mass, Dunstable, New Hampshire, and so they eventually cut it up and called it Nashua. And it took them, let me see, it was New Hampshire, it says here, New Hampshire was, it was incorporated in New Hampshire in the year 1746. And it took 90 years for them to change the name to Nashua. Now, I'm not sure if this is true, but in looking up what the name Nashua means, does anyone know what the name Nashua means?
It means a river with a pebbly bottom.
Yes, that's exactly what I found, but then there was another one that said land between 2 rivers. Have you ever heard that one? Land between 2 rivers. So we'll let people decide where they wanted to get that name. Thank you. So looking at Nashua in 1841, there were 6,000 people. And there were 50 stores in downtown. There were 8 churches and 10 taverns. So you can see who won out on that one. And there were 2 textile mills. And the 2 textile mills included the Nashua Manufacturing Company, started in 1823, and the Jackson Mills of 1828. So they were up and running by the time 1841 rolls around. Included with all that technology was the Nashua and Lowell Railroad, which was opened in 1838. So you can see that we are a thriving city with communication, transportation. We had it all. The city hall, this particular city hall, was built in 1842. And I believe that that's the city hall that caused the big rift in the city. Where to put the city hall? Are people familiar with that story? That's a whole nother story, where they split Nashua into Nashua and Nashville for a few years, and they became 2 completely separate towns over where to put the city hall, but that's a whole nother story. So imagine that the downtown looks something like this. This is one of the earliest pictures they have of Nashua. This is dated 1856 in the archives. So Nashua of 1842 probably looked like something like this. And this is a later picture, but they did have a fire department. They had 5 selectmen. They had 7 police officers. They had 3 fire engine companies in 1842. There were 10 doctors, 7 attorneys, and they had 11 one-room schools in the town of Nashua in 1842. So you can see that they are really a very well-functioning town, I should say. Now, in the 1840s, most of you have probably heard of Horace Mann. And we always hear that Horace Mann was the father of education. And we learn that as a fact. But what did Horace Mann actually do to promote education? And how did the town of Nashua jump on that bandwagon? So what was Horace Mann saying now that we all know he was the father of education? He said that citizens cannot maintain ignorance and freedom. And this is something they were trying to instill in their children from the earliest age. This education should be free to all, it should be universal, it should be non-sectarian, and education must be taught using the tenets of a free society. This education must be provided by well-trained teachers. So he was really promoting the improvement of education because he had traveled extensively to see the horrible condition that children were learning in the one-room schools. They were broken down, they didn't have facilities, they had poorly trained teachers, lack of supplies, you'll see all that. So he was out there giving speeches all over New England about how to improve your school systems. Now, another one was Orville Taylor. Orville Taylor was a publisher in the 1830s and 40s who had the same feelings that Horace Mann had. Common schools are the source of our nation's intelligence. They had grand names like they are the repositories of freedom and the sentinels of liberty, lighthouses of freedom, fountains of intelligence, and the pillars of the republic. And all we had in those days were little tiny one-room schools. But they had a vision. Their vision was improve your schools, have an educated electorate, and you'll be able to maintain the freedom. And that was the bottom line. And he said, same thing that Horace Mann said, our common schools are neglected. We have to educate the infant mind. He said, if you educate children, give them a purpose, they won't end up in jail. That's exactly what he was saying. Schools are their teachers. There is a desperate need to upgrade the profession and the schools. So 7, learned men must become involved in supporting their common schools by serving on superintending committees. And that's exactly what Nashua did. They set up one of the earliest superintending committees that, and they set up a number of jobs for those superintending committees. And these were leaders of the community. These were doctors who were willing to serve. They were the lawyers. They were the businessmen who had a vested interest in getting these children educated. Now, this was set up as their job. They were to visit the school districts, which Nashua had 11 at the time. They would attend on examination days. They would go to the schools at the end of the 10 or 11 weeks in the summer or the 10 or 11 weeks in the winter, and they would actually watch as the children were examined. They would ask questions to the children and see whether they could read, whether they could cipher in their heads, whether they could recite the presidents of the United States. They would ask them questions, and the children have to stand up there and be ready to answer those questions. They would go in there and they would question the teachers and the district school committee men. How about the discipline and the proficiency of the scholars? They would evaluate teachers. They would look at whatever textbooks they were using, and they would set standards of discipline. They actually came up with lists of rules about what you could and couldn't do in discipline. They would set the annual budgets, and they would write this annual superintendent's report. So these were very learned men who put these reports together. And this little booklet that I'm giving you all, these are exact words from those superintending reports. I have taken little excerpts from them so that you can read those later. Then on a local level, in the district level, there was something called the Prudential School Committee men. These were 3 men, never women, 3 men from each of the 11 districts that would be in charge of the local school, the local one-room school. They received no pay. They were just there as good citizens to keep an eye on the schools. They were chosen for their willingness to serve. They hired the district teachers. The superintending committee just kind of made guidelines on what a teacher should have to get a job. They laid in the wood supply, which is well documented in their books of record. They solicited room and board for a contracted teacher because most of the teachers did not live in the districts in which they taught. They usually came from outside of the district and they would rent a room in somebody's house. Now there were many places in New England where the teacher would have to live with the families of the children that she taught. And that was never a comfortable situation. So over the years, and everyone wanted the teacher to be living with them, but over the years that got a little uncomfortable. There was no privacy. Sometimes you were even bedding down with the children. That was not work. So the Prudential School Committee would help find the teacher a room in somebody's house or in a local inn. They oversaw the expenditure of tax money. Now that's a whole nother subject. Where did they get the money to run these schools? They were tax supported, and it was built into the tax structure of all the landowners and business owners, and a certain percentage was set aside for the schools, and it was evenly distributed for the most part. And we've got all those records, as a matter of fact. Now, the local school committeeman was just a farmer. He might be the man who runs the ferry. Now, he even had additional duties. Imagine the local pressure that he was under to hire someone who knew someone who was related to someone. Buy the wood from me, for $1.25. They had to hire and ensure the good character of the teachers. They had to make school repairs, which were always needed. They would reconcile differences between parents and students, and that was endemic to the system. They would meet regularly and keep very accurate records. And he would have to maintain his involvement and promise that he would do that. Now, one of the things that the Nashua Historical Society has allowed me to use and read is the actual record book of the 1841 schoolhouse that I work in, and it's here safely tucked away, and it is the actual record book kept by the Prudential School Committee men of the District Number 1 schoolhouse beginning in 1809. And you're going to say, well, it was built in 1841. Well, there was an earlier school right across Spit Brook that was built in 1809, and they started the records in 1809, and they kept passing this book on and on and on. Whenever they would have a school committee meeting, they would write what happened in that school committee meeting, down to the last detail, how much they paid for a broom, how much they paid for a cord of wood, who delivered the wood, what they paid the teacher, and on and on and on. And that record book, and I'll show you a couple of pages of that, is in the Nashua Historical Society. I've been so honored to be able to look at that book and use it. But there were other realities. Even though we were a very progressive city, there were other realities for early education in Nashua. Teachers were, for the most part, untrained and unprepared. They were young and inexperienced. Many teachers were right out of the 8th grade. Now, this does get rectified as years go by, but early on, the schoolhouses were in disrepair. There were attendance issues, and if you look in the records, very often, there might be 50% attendance. In the records of the District Number 1 schoolhouse, there were 45 children registered, and the average attendance was 26 students. And that was because of farm work and poor hygiene and disease. And it's in black and white in the records how many children. They kept very accurate records. These teachers didn't have much support. They changed jobs frequently. Frequently, they didn't even teach two sessions in the same school. They would move from district to district. And many of the women would teach a couple of sessions, which would be 10 or 11 weeks each in the summer and 10 or 11 in the winter. They would move on and get married, which was the expectation. This, of course, is until we get into normal schools, which start training teachers, and that's a whole nother subject apart from this. There was a diversity of textbooks in the school. The children brought, in 1841, the books that they had at home. Any books that they brought at home were the ones that the teacher would have to make the lessons from. So add that to the fact that the teacher was teaching kindergarten through 8th grade. She was teaching all ages, all levels, all grades, and she did not have a whole set of textbooks for the children, regardless of what the grade was. The one thing that you can tell from the records that they had a whole set of was a set of Bibles. Even though they did not teach religion, the records of the school, of the records of 1842 indicate that our school had about 38 Bibles, which meant that they were encouraged to read those in their spare time. But they did not teach religion. So there was poor supervision. It was a short duration, like I said, 10 or 11 weeks summer, 10 or 11 weeks. And there were always unruly or abusive scholars, always. And the records are very clear on that. And parental indifference. You will find in the readings that I've given out, and I will give the rest of them out, that parents were often very indifferent to the education of their children. So that was another hurdle that they had to cross. Here are the records that I was talking to you about. Miss Bancroft made $9.92 a month. So this is district number 1 school. Mr. Rodney Kendall, who taught there in the winter, made $27 a month. Oh, that's the same reaction we get from the kids when we tell them that. But you can see that the average attendance is exactly the same. 39 census of students, 39. And the average attendance for Miss Bancroft was 24. A little better in the winter because the boys are coming off the farm in the winter, and that's why you would see the disparity in the numbers of summer and winter. And you can see that the amount of tax money that was given out to the various districts, I'm only down to District 8 here, it's all I could fit on, was $131. And they had to apportion that the best way they had, and they had to account for that $131 and where it went and how much they paid the teachers. So the town reports, like I said, were beginning in 1838. These reports, as you're going to read in these little booklets that I have for you, they praised and critiqued and they named the teachers by name. Now, some of those teachers are indelible in those records as having done a terrible job or a very good job. There is one that says something about a Mr. Cummings who was worse than nothing. So, yes, poor Mr. Cummings didn't last very long because he didn't have any discipline, but it's in the booklet. They would assess the job done by the Prudential committees. So these superintending committees would get, they would assess the Prudential men who were the district level, and they would say whether they were doing a good job for free or not. Okay, and they talked about the scholars, the parents, and the community at large, and how much support was coming from the community. They detailed the progress and the deficiencies of scholars and teachers. They would talk about the effectiveness of the teaching methods in the various schools, the materials that were used, and what kind of discipline was being used in the schools, whether it was a good or bad method. Now, these are part of the records each year. They would say how many books, these particular books were the ones that the school committee asked the parents to buy because the schools did not buy the books. Very often they could not afford them. If someone did have them, the children would share in the classroom. So you can see that they didn't have a lot of books or a whole set of books. It's kind of, so you'd have to really study that to see what's going on. And this is another year. This is probably the 1842, which tells how many books. You'd have to turn it this way to see how many books they had. But these were the names of the most common books in those days. They discussed the condition of the school buildings, and they were obsessed with the temperature of schools. I don't know why, but at one year, they even suggested that every school install a thermometer because the kids were either cold or too hot. They talked about repairs and replacements, temperature, air quality, and comfort, and offered opinions about why some schools were better than others, particularly the methods of discipline. They chastised parents about absenteeism. They talked about the truancy of children and what caused truancy. Sometimes they'll talk about how there's a circus in town and kids will give up school to go sneak off to the circus. And very often they talked about absenteeism because parents were putting their kids to work in the mills. Eventually they came up with a law that said they had to attend a certain number of days per year if they were going to be allowed to work in those mills. They talked about ganging up on teachers in their districts and spreading rumors, people spreading rumors and writing false excuses for being absent, not attending to repairs. Oh, and there was a great blame on the ethnic newcomers. Always, yeah. So they praised the community when they attended the end of the year examination. And I think the newcomers in those days were the Irish people. So they got short shrift. So this is the District 1 schoolhouse book of entry, that I was telling you about, that is handwritten from 1809 up to 1870, and then it ends. And it was beautifully begun in a calligraphy. This is where it starts in 1809. Gorgeous calligraphy. They kept the most beautiful records. And if you had time to read this, it would say who the moderator was, who the clerk, who the Prudential School Committee people were, what they spent money on, etc. And very careful records. But the one that interests me the most is this one, because this is the one in 1841 where they came to the decision whether to repair an old school or build a new one in District Number 1. And when I came upon this page, it was like the Holy Grail for my school, our school, because it tells that they decided to purchase a piece of land for $75 right next to the cemetery from James Campbell next door, and they would build the schoolhouse before Thanksgiving. And this was October. Yes. And they had that schoolhouse up in 6 weeks. They didn't have to go through any, red tape. They just got the community together and built a school that is now 178 years old and still being used by school children. We're so proud of it. So this is the one where they made the decision to build that school. They built the school for $629. And right where Barnes & Noble is today was a tavern. It was Little's Tavern. John Little, who worked in that tavern, who owned the tavern, loaned the district $200 to get that schoolhouse started. And unfortunately, John Little, his own little boy, never got to attend that school. The little boy had died at age 3 before the schoolhouse was even built. So these are some of the sad stories that you can glean from that beautiful cemetery next door to us. So this was a very proud moment when they were going to get that schoolhouse built, and sure enough they did. And then they sold off the old building, probably as a storage shed. I don't know whatever happened to the original District 1, but they sold it off. It's in the records. And they stocked the new one with wood and opened it in the winter of 1842. And that's what it looked like in 1898. And that is a classic picture of that schoolhouse. The outhouse is in the back. We don't have the outhouse anymore. The picket fences are gone, and that field is now Walgreens parking lot, unfortunately. But the kids love to see this picture so that they know that we do preserve history. And this is the District Number school. This is the District Number 1 in about 1898, taken by Mr. Ingalls. This is one of Mr. Ingalls' pictures. And this is the schoolhouse today, and we have since lost that beautiful tree to the right. But in 2012, we planted a new one out front, and it's now 6 years old, and it's growing beautifully. We're very happy. We put a new maple tree out there. We had an Arbor Day ceremony, and that tree is beautiful. You'll see it in the front of the school now. This is the view from this is the view inside. I would love to invite you to come to the schoolhouse someday and see what it is inside. Every time I open the door, I get excited. I think I must have lived another life as a school marm. So, what are some of the things that they said in 1841 about, what are some of the things that the superintendents said in those days? And if someone would like to read that, anybody would like to stand and be my reader? Thank you.
The best teachers agree that very little corporal punishment is necessary in school, and that gentle discipline is generally most efficacious, and that the larger scholars should be governed by moral means or else dismissed from the school.
Okay, but and that's a very nice way of saying try not to spank them. However, they always left the door open. When you read some of these reports, you'll see that they never stopped teachers from using the rod of correction, which could be a hickory stick or a ruler, or a few of us got it in our day too. And I will give you the names of these schools as well. Let me see this.
So where was number 1 originally before they built the new one?
It was just on the other side of Spitbrook Road. If you're looking at the cemetery, on the right of the cemetery is Spitbrook. It's kind of just trickling by. The other school was on the other side of the Spitbrook. Yeah. It wasn't far away. So this is the old Mulberry Street School, and someone told me that it's been converted to some kind of a veterans something or other. Does anybody know? Not a VFW, but I've been told that part of it is still there. I'm not sure. Okay, so this is the Dunstable Road School, also known as the Silver Spring School. One schoolhouse is in such ruinous condition that the scholars cannot stand up to recite on account of the sloping floor. So this is to say, get to your schoolhouse and get it up to snuff. Now, do I have another reader here? Anybody? You were very good at that.
That most mischievous evil of evils, whispering, was not noticed at all, nor was the eye of the teacher necessary to secure obedience to good regulations.
There you go. Whispering. In fact, we have a chart in our classroom that says no whispering, because they thought that was an insidious practice in the schoolhouses, and you think, oh my goodness, now we have cell phones giving answers to each other. So, and another thing they would say is, in a manufacturing village like this, the inhabitants are brought together from various places. Consequently, many of the children, unlike in their whole character, meet for the first time in the schoolroom, having received their earliest impressions and formed their earliest habits among different influences, some of which are exceedingly pernicious. Oh my goodness, those Irishmen coming into town. There is an evil in our schools of far greater magnitude than is generally considered. It appears from the statistics that the whole number of scholars in our school the past year was 1,515, and the average attendance was 978. Or more than 1 in 3 was habitually absent, losing the benefit of the money expended. So you can see that absenteeism was a big problem, and these are all the ills that they have to address. Great ill was manifested toward the Prudential School Committee man, and one of the chief complaints was that at one time, he kissed the schoolmarm. And this is in the reports forever and ever. The Groton Road School. Now this is lovely. As for Miss Angelina Phelps, the peculiarity in her method of instruction, in her exactness, adopting the motto, what is worth being done at all must be done well. Some of her classes were less interesting than others. We noticed a class of dull, stupid boys who must have tried her patience that made improvement under her training. So they didn't mince words in those days. You were pernicious or dull or stupid. Now this is the old Belvedere School. That one went away quite early in the history. The Chandler Street School. These are just some of the schools that they this is the Main Street School, or the Nashua High School that was built in 1853, completed by 1854. Prior to that, you did not get to go to a public school, a public high school. You had to pay. And this is the Harbor School. Mount Pleasant School, one of the 3, I believe, that's been on that site. And the Spring Street High School, which was knocked down for the courthouse, I understand. I'm still learning about the buildings in Nashua. And thanks for listening to that. But I just wanted to share with you some of these, did everybody get one of these? Okay, this is just some easy reading for you. Okay. Oh, we got plenty. Yes, we do.
Thank you.
These are just some of the excerpts. Sure. Okay, yeah. I have plenty. Yeah.
Susan, I have one question.
Yes.
Just out of curiosity, the one-room schoolhouse, is that on a slab? Is there like a dirt crawl space?
There is a dirt crawl space.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's got granite foundations, so it's very, very well built. Now, school was not compulsory in those days, and that comes much later. I'm not sure of what year they made it compulsory, but it's more like the 70s or 80s, 1870s or 80s. Now, if anybody has any questions, I'd just like to share. Yes?
Really quick, because I have to go, but how would we get in touch with you to tour the Little Red Schoolhouse?
If you look up Nashua Schoolhouse, it's got a website. We have a website. My information is there. Okay?
My sister went there when she was in school, and I never got a chance.
Ah,
I really-
yes. We'll be reopening again in October, like October 1st. So the schoolhouse will be set up. Everything's packed away for the summer, but if anyone wants to come in, it will be reopened, and I'll make time to come down. I'm only 2 miles from the schoolhouse. Excuse me. So if we just take a look at I had a couple of things to read. If I could just get 5 readers just to give you some examples. Thank you. Thanks, that's great. Okay. Would you like to read one?
Sure.
Thank you. Great, thank you. Just to kind of wind up here with some thoughts from our superintending committee that kept these wonderful records. There you go. And let me see, anybody else? Volunteers, just like the, thank you. Okay, you can be the voice of the superintending committees. Okay, you'd like to start?
Administration local control. It's very desirable that a Board of Education should be established in this state. Yet it would be very unwise to give such a board any power which would take the schools out of the control of the several districts. The chief advantage of such a board would lie in its awakening the districts to a sense of their duty and enlightening them upon the best methods of instruction.
Thank you. Thanks. They were eloquent, weren't they?
Indeed. Good work. Miss Sterrett took charge of the school reluctantly, with the expectation that a gentleman would be employed as principal after the first term. But under her judicious and most excellent management of the school, the school was so prosperous as to render a change altogether undesirable, and she was accordingly induced to remain at the head of this department during the year, where she secured the respect and confidence of her pupils and the entire approbation of her employers. Her discipline was mild, energetic, decided, firm, and efficient. She governed by love.
My word.
Corporal punishment has rarely been inflicted, yet in the few instances where appeals to higher motives would not answer, she has had the happy faculty of making the rod successful.
So she used love and force. But do you wonder if Miss Starrett was related to someone? She got this glowing, wonderful report. We don't know.
Conditions of schoolhouses. We voluntarily expend liberal sums for the erection and repair of churches and our private dwellings, but grumble at a light assessment for a comfortable schoolhouse. Even our horses and cattle are housed or sheltered according to the season and to their natural wants. But the comfort of our children 6 hours in the day during the coldest portion of the year is often and most unwisely and inhumanely neglected.
Thank you very much, yes. So they were chastising them for not making them as nice as their churches.
Praise. One of characteristics of the district influenced by the skill of the teachers is the apparent pleasure the scholars seem to exhibit. They look as if they came to school to drink of the crystal of knowledge and not to be dosed with some nauseous medicine.
The crystal of knowledge. Ah, yes. Thank you.
Behavior. The summer school was much thinned by a misunderstanding between some parents and the teacher, on account of what was thought to be improper punishment of one or more pupils. Where the blame was, the committee cannot say with certainty. They are confident, however, that the school was under bad discipline. Your committee believe that, unruly as the school has been, it may be well governed, and that proper discipline will prevent the pupils from stretching themselves on the seats, kicking, talking, and before they have reached the door, yelling forth their joy at being dismissed. These peculiar obstacles can be overcome.
Thank you. So little has changed. So we have one more. Do we have someone else? Yes, thank you.
Chastising a district. We regret to find in some districts petty prejudices and jealousies which interfere with the comfort and success of the teachers. These are religious, social, or political. One man inquires at what church the instructor worships, another how he votes. This man is soured because another family boards the teacher. That because his son or daughter was not employed to teach. In one district, a rumor is afloat against the teacher's character or competency. In another, a suspicion that he is pompous or partial. Some self-styled Apollo questions his master's rules and throws out hints that he is mistaken. Some prudish or conceited dame finds fault with the dress or speech or recreations of the mistress. Nor do the committee escape these charitable eyes and tongues. But the evil lies chiefly in the district itself, in the minds and hearts of the scholars and the families. It gives a name to the district and warns off every good instructor. One fiery tongue will fasten a stigma upon a whole neighborhood. If our schools would enjoy prosperity and realize the object of all our expenditures and care, their jealousies and envies and old wives' fables must be killed out and banished.
Thank you. Eloquent. Just as eloquent as they were. Yes, we have another.
Attendance. The attendance was very irregular, and the school consequently rendered unprofitable in a great degree to those who were constant. Every attraction, such as a caravan or circus, was sure to draw away a large number of scholars. Had the parents been interested to send their scholars to school constantly, the money would have been spent more profitably.
Thank you. I have one last one. Administration and local control. It is very desirable that a Board of Education should be established in this state. Yet it would be very unwise to give such a board any power which would take the schools out of the control of the several districts. The chief advantage of such a board would lie in its awakening the districts to a sense of their duty and enlightening them upon the best methods of instruction. So I don't think that the fathers of Nashua, the superintending committee men, would ever go for the Board of Education coming out of the federal government. So that they wanted local control, and that's an idea that many people adhere to today. So I've given out just a few of the excerpts from the superintending committee reports, and you can read those on your own because we could go through this hour after hour. There are so many of them. But if you have any questions, I'll be here, and I want to thank you so much for coming. And I hope it gives you an idea of how responsible the superintending committees of Nashua were and how responsible the people became to build those brand new schools that you saw, which most of them have disappeared since. But they did take on the job of improving their schools from the time of the reformers on, and they continue to do that. And so if you have any questions, I'll be here, and I thank you for coming. Yes.
This was absolutely wonderful, and I'm wondering, is your PowerPoint or presentation on your website? Because those images are fabulous.
Oh, the images, thanks to the Historical Society, helped me put this together. And I put this together quite a few years ago, and I just had not presented it. And so it's just kind of sat on the back burner. But I have not put it on the website, but I could. I mean, if I could get permission from the Historical Society to use those images in a pedagogical way. So we'll talk about that. But thank you. Questions? Yes.
This may seem obvious, but so you are the one who pulled these from the
Yes,
report.
and there were thousands I could have pulled. I just pulled some of
That's
them
what I thought you
interesting.
meant, but I wanted to-
They have 1838 reports all the way up to modern times. So I just took 10 years, pulled some interesting quotes, but they're pages and pages long.
That was quite a task, just that.
Oh, just to write it. I mean, just to write these reports. And they were very, very eloquent writers. Any questions? Thank you very much.